The wind carried dust across the high plains that night, scouring the wooden walls of Elias Ward's cabin like a rasp. He sat hunched at the small table, a lantern throwing shadows across the rough boards, the smell of boiled beans heavy in the air. Nights were long in the territory, and Elias was used to silence, the kind that pressed against your ears until you almost believed you'd gone deaf. Then came the knock. 3 quick raps, frantic, followed by a voice cracking in the cold. "Please, please, let me in." Elias froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. No one knocked on his door at this hour. Travelers on the trail passed miles south, neighbors lived a day's ride away. He reached instinctively for the rifle leaning against the wall. The voice came again, softer now, pleading. "I beg you, let me in. They're out there." Elias crossed the floor, boots thudding against the planks, and pulled the door open an inch. Wind shoved through the gap, carrying grit and the sharp smell of rain. A woman stood there, shawl clutched around her shoulders, eyes wide with terror. Her face was streaked with dirt, lips cracked from thirst. "Who are you?" Elias demanded. "Clara," she whispered. "I just need shelter. Please." He studied her, suspicion etched into the lines of his weather-beaten face. Out here, a stranger could mean trouble, and women didn't appear at a rancher's door in the dead of night unless danger, or deceit, was close behind. Still, the desperation in her voice pushed against his instincts. He unlatched the door. She stumbled inside, sagging near the hearth, holding her hands toward the faint warmth of the dying fire. Elias shut the door hard and dropped the bar across it. "You alone?" he asked. She nodded quickly, but her eyes slid away from his. He didn't like that. For a while, the only sound was her ragged breathing and the hiss of wind outside. Elias kept the rifle close, watching her from across the room. Her shawl slipped as she reached toward the flames, revealing the faint mark burned into the skin of her wrist. Not a scar from work or accident, this was deliberate. Elias's stomach tightened. He had seen that mark once before. Years ago, on a wanted poster nailed to the sheriff's door. It belonged to the Kerrigan gang, a band of outlaws known for robbing stagecoaches and leaving bodies in their wake. Clara noticed his gaze and tugged the shawl back over her wrist, quick as a rattler. "What's out there?" Elias asked. His voice was even, but his pulse hammered in his ears. She didn't answer at first, just stared into the fire as if trying to lose herself in its glow. Finally, she said, "Riders. They won't stop until they find me." Elias leaned back against the wall, thumb brushing the worn edge of his rifle stock. She could be telling the truth. Or she could be leading them straight to his door. Outside, the wind shifted. In the distance, faint hooves thudded across the hardpan, too many to mistake for stray cattle. Clara flinched, pulling her shawl tighter. Elias's jaw clenched. He had let her in. He couldn't undo that now. The knock that started as a plea had opened more than his door, it had invited trouble into his solitary world. He watched her profile in the lantern light, trying to decide if she was a victim, or the storm itself. The hooves drew closer, fading, then circling. The cabin creaked as if it too feared the night. Clara finally turned to him, voice trembling. "You don't understand. If they find me here, you'll be caught in it too." Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, eyes narrowing. "Then you'd better start explaining who you really are." The fire popped, throwing sparks upward. In the silence that followed, Clara lowered her gaze. The brand on her wrist seemed to glow in the flickering light. The morning sun rose pale over the prairie, bleeding light across the wooden boards of the cabin. Elias stepped outside, rifle resting against his shoulder. The woman, Clara, remained inside, silent, tending the fire as if she belonged there. He saddled his horse with deliberate slowness, thoughts heavy. He needed answers, but first he needed supplies. The ride into town was long and dry. Dust clung to his boots, grit stung his eyes. People noticed him the moment he tied his horse to the post outside the mercantile. They always did, solitary men stood out, but today the stairs carried something sharper. Mrs. Holbrook, the storekeeper's wife, lowered her voice when he entered. "Ryder saw you last night. Said there was a woman at your door." "That's so, Ward." Elias's jaw tightened. He set a sack of flour on the counter. "Don't believe every tale you hear." Her lips thinned, but she said nothing more. Still, the whisper spread quick as tumbleweed. By the time Elias left the store, men leaning against the hitching rail were already watching him with narrowed eyes. The sheriff was waiting. Broad-shouldered, gray around the temples, he stood at the edge of the street with arms folded. "Ward," he said, voice low. "Need a word." Elias followed him behind the jailhouse, where the noise of town dimmed. "There's talk you took in a woman last night." The sheriff's gaze was steady. "If that's true, you'd best be careful. A fugitive's on the loose. Rode with the Kerrigan gang. Folks say she split from them, but that doesn't mean she ain't dangerous." Elias kept his expression unreadable. "What makes you think I'd open my door to an outlaw?" The sheriff shrugged. "Man gets lonely out here. A soft voice at the door can cloud judgment. Just know this, if she's with you, the gang will come sniffing soon enough." He rode home under a sky thick with storm clouds. The weight of the sheriff's words pressed on him. By the time he reached the cabin, Clara was outside stacking wood. She paused when she saw him, eyes searching his face for some sign of what he carried back with him. "You went to town," she said quietly. Elias dismounted. "Had to. I suppose they told you." Her voice was flat, but her hands trembled against the woodpile. He didn't answer, only pushed past her into the cabin. She followed a step behind, setting a kettle on the stove, moving like she had always lived there. It unsettled him, how easily she fit herself into the spaces of his life. Over supper she tried to speak. "I can help. Cook. Clean. Tend the stock." Elias studied her. "Why? Women don't wander these plains alone unless they've got something to run from." Clara met his gaze but offered no reply. The silence between them was heavier than words. That night, as rain began to spit against the windows, Elias sat sharpening his knife by the fire. The dog growled low in its throat, ears pricking toward the darkness outside. Clara stiffened. "They've found me." Elias rose, rifle in hand. Through the cracks in the shutter, he glimpsed shapes moving, 3, maybe 4 riders, circling slow. Their horses' hooves thudded against the wet earth, steady, patient. "They won't stop," Clara whispered. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with something else, resignation, or guilt. Elias's grip tightened. He'd seen storms roll in across the plains, but this one wasn't wind and rain. It was men, armed and searching. And he'd let the reason inside his own walls. Outside, a voice called through the rain. "Clara. Time to come home." The fire spat sparks. Clara drew the shawl tighter around her wrist, face pale in the glow. Elias turned toward her, his voice low and hard. "Then you'd best tell me the truth, before the night swallows us both." Rain swept across the cabin roof, drumming a steady beat that masked the sound of hooves, until one rider broke from the dark and shouted, his voice ragged with command. "Clara. Step out, and no one gets hurt." Elias stood at the window, rifle ready, eyes narrowing at the shifting figures in the night. Clara stood rigid near the hearth, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. "They won't leave," Elias said. "Not until they've got what they came for." Clara swallowed hard. "They'll burn this place down if they must." Elias turned, his patience gone. "Then speak plain, woman. Who are you to them?" Her lips trembled, but she lifted her chin, defiant even in fear. "I was with them. Not by choice. My father, he traded me. I was 17. They branded me, kept me like property." She pulled the shawl from her wrist, exposing the scar fully, raw in the lantern light. "I cooked their meals, mended their clothes. When I tried to run, they threatened to kill me. So I stayed, until I saw a chance to slip away. They'll hunt me till the end for it. That's who I am." Elias felt the storm pressing against the walls, but it was her words that cut deepest. He had lived years with silence, with ghosts of a wife lost to fever. Loneliness had hardened him, but seeing Clara there, dirty, shaking, yet still standing, stirred something long buried. "You expect me to believe you?" His voice was low, but it cracked in the middle. "I don't expect anything," she said, eyes burning. "But I'd rather die here than crawl back to them." The dog barked suddenly, sharp, then yelped as a bullet smashed into the cabin door. Wood splintered, dust clouding the air. Clara flinched, dropping to her knees. Elias pulled her behind the table, rifle steady in his hands. Outside, the riders hooped, circling like wolves. Another voice rang out, mocking. "Ward! You've got no business with her. Send her out, and we'll let you be." Elias fired through the shutter, the shot swallowed by thunder. A cry went up, followed by the pounding of hooves retreating, only to return, closer. Clara's breath came in gasps. "They won't stop. You don't know them." "Then you don't know me," Elias muttered. The two locked eyes in the flickering light. For the first time, Clara saw past the hardness in him, the grief, the years alone, the man who had nothing left to lose. And Elias, in turn, saw not just a branded fugitive, but a woman broken and unbroken all at once. The storm rattled the shutters, rain running in streams down the walls. Another shot cracked, glass shattering from the lantern. Darkness pressed in, lit only by the fire. Elias grabbed Clara's hand, rough palm against hers. "Stay low. If they breach, we fight. But I'll not hand you back to wolves." Her eyes widened, shimmering in the firelight. For the first time, she believed him. Outside, silence fell. The kind that prickled the skin, heavier than gunfire. Then a voice, colder than before. "Dawn's coming, Ward. When it breaks, so will you." The riders melted into the storm, leaving only hoofprints in the mud and dread in the cabin. Clara pulled her shawl around her shoulders, whispering, "They'll return." Elias stared into the fire, jaw set. "Then let them. We'll be waiting." Dawn broke gray and heavy, the storm clouds hanging low over the plains. The cabin smelled of smoke and gunpowder, boards splintered where bullets had struck. Elias had slept in a chair with rifle across his lap, though sleep was too generous a word for the shallow doze broken by every creak. Clara sat curled near the hearth, eyes open, shawl wrapped tight. The silence was broken by the distant rumble of hooves. Not a patrol, not a single rider, too many. Elias rose, heart hammering. He checked the rifle, slid shells into place. "They've come back," Clara whispered. He gave her a hard look. "Then this ends here." The first shots came before the riders were even in sight, bullets cracking through the shutters, thudding into the walls. Clara dropped to the floor. Elias returned fire, steady, controlled. Through the storm of gunfire, a voice boomed. "Ward! Hand her over and live. Keep her, and we'll bury you both." Elias shouted back, "You'll have to dig your own graves first." The gang hooped, circling, firing in bursts. A lantern shattered, flames licking up the wall. Smoke filled the cabin. Elias cursed, beating at the fire with a blanket, but another shot rang out and he stumbled, grazing wound on his arm. Clara crawled to him, eyes wide. "You're bleeding." "Forget it. Get the shotgun, under the bed." Her hands shook as she pulled the weapon free. Another bullet tore through the door, splinters flying. A rider charged close, gun raised. Clara lifted the shotgun, breath caught in her throat, and fired. The blast threw the man from his horse, body crashing into the mud. The cabin rang with silence for a heartbeat, then the outlaws screamed, furious. Shots peppered the walls. Elias grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her down. "You just painted their wrath," he growled. "I saved your life," she shot back, voice trembling but fierce. Elias met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no doubt in it. Outside, the storm of hooves and voices grew louder. But then, over the din, came another sound, the sharp call of a bugle, the pounding of fresh horses. The sheriff and townsmen, rifles flashing in the dawn light, had come. The Kerrigan gang broke under the pressure, retreating across the plain, dragging their wounded. Gunfire echoed until it faded into distance. Elias slumped against the wall, blood soaking his sleeve. Clara pressed cloth to his wound, tears streaking the soot on her cheeks. The sheriff entered, eyes scanning the cabin, then falling on Clara. "So it's true," he said grimly. "You've been hiding her." Neighbors crowded behind him, whispers sharp, "Outlaw woman, dangerous, should be hanged." Elias pushed himself up, voice hoarse but steady. "She saved me. She ain't Kerrigan's anymore. Whatever she was, she's mine to stand for now." The sheriff's gaze lingered on Clara's branded wrist, then on Elias's bleeding arm. The firelight flickered over all their faces, the air thick with judgment. Finally, the sheriff said, "We'll see what the town decides." He turned and left, leaving tension heavy as smoke. Clara's hands trembled as she bound Elias's arm. "They'll never believe me," she whispered. Elias closed his eyes, jaw clenched. "Then we'll give them reason to." Outside, the sky cleared, sun spilling across the wet plains. But the cabin remained shadowed, caught between the whispers of the town and the vengeance of the gang. The days that followed blurred with the smell of smoke, the sting of medicine, and the weight of silence. Elias's arm healed slow under Clara's care. She scrubbed the soot from the cabin walls, patched the holes with planks, and each night stoked the fire until the hearth glowed steady again. Neighbors came and went, some leaving food, most leaving whispers. In the town, judgment circled like buzzards. "She's a Kerrigan woman. She can't be trusted." But no one dared press too far, not after seeing her fight at Elias's side. One evening, the sheriff returned. He stepped into the cabin, hat in hand, eyes scanning the repaired boards and the woman who moved through the room as if she belonged. "I've got the papers," he said, voice heavy. From his coat he pulled a folded sheet, the bounty notice, Clara's name inked beneath the brand. He held it over the fire, flame catching the edge. Slowly, he let it burn, curling into ash. "Town don't need old grudges," he muttered. "What you two do out here is your business. But don't give me reason to regret it." He left without another word. The door closed, leaving only the crackle of fire and Clara's soft breath. Elias sat in his chair, watching the flames. "You're free now," he said, though his tone carried more weight than relief. Clara shook her head. Freedom isn't in a piece of paper. It's in where I stand. And I'm standing here. She crossed the room, laying her shawl across his shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly of smoke and rain, yet it was warm, worn with her hands. Elias looked up, startled by the gesture. From his pocket, he pulled a small object, carved wood, smoothed by hours of work. A ring, plain but solid. He set it in her palm without a word. Her fingers closed around it, eyes wet in the firelight. No vows were spoken, no promises made. The silence between them held more truth than words. Outside, the plain stretched endless, washed clean by storms. Inside, the cabin glowed with a quiet warmth. They sat together, not outlaw and rancher, not fugitive and guard, but two souls tempered by fire and storm. For the first time in years, Elias did not fear the silence. And for the first time since she'd begged to be let in, Clara no longer feared being turned away.